silhouette of the abandoned house. I'm telling you, I really saw it. Dahlia's eyes scanned the round lunch table, centering wide looks on the three other people occupying the seats. 2 out of the 3 stared back at her with concern evident in their expressions, and she blew out an exasperated breath. No matter how many times she explained herself to her friends, no one believed her. No one except the one who didn't look concerned. In a desperate last attempt to win them over, she looked to her childhood best friend. "Tell them, Joseph." Although Joseph didn't seem concerned like her other 2 friends, he was more intrigued with his chicken sandwich than her incessant rambling. Dahlia nudged him with her foot, gaining a singular glance from his gray eyes before he returned to his food. "Sorry, Dahlia," he mumbled through a bite, washing it down with his juice before continuing. "I didn't see anything." "That's because you always fall asleep?" She crossed her arms and let her back hit her chair as she huffed out a breath. Who was she kidding? No one would believe her unless they saw it. Joseph was her only hope, and he cared more about his stupid chicken sandwich than her. "Doll, we want to believe you, really, but it's been months, and nobody has seen it but you," her second closest friend Laura said from beside her, running a hand through her tousled hot pink hair before fixing heavily made-up eyes on her. "And you've been losing sleep. You're basically as pale as this imaginary figure you keep muttering about." The sight from her bedroom window only gave her a distant view of the silhouetted figure, but with the binoculars she sporadically borrowed, more like stole, from her cousin, she was able to catch sight of the hard-to-miss, unpigmented skin of a ghost. She didn't really believe in ghosts, but after what she saw, she wasn't sure what she believed. "You do look pretty tired, Dahlia. Maybe you should stop this game and—" Her friend Jamie started to chime in with her soft-spoken voice, but Dahlia cut her off. "It's not a game, Jamie. I saw it." Her heightened tone caught the attention of her nearby peers in the boisterous cafeteria, but she hardly noticed. "I'm not crazy, and I'll prove it to you." She pointed fingers at her 3 friends. "All of you, just wait." She stood to her full height, discarding her half-eaten lunch and storming out of the cafeteria with a new mission in mind. No matter what, she would get a picture. Then they'd realize she wasn't a nutcase. When she got home, she was greeted by the smell of strong seasoning, which meant only one thing: her mom was home. "Dahlia, is that you?" came her mother's thickly accented voice. Dahlia rounded the corner and entered the kitchen to see her mother transferring a pan into the oven. She met her mother's soft brown eyes that could melt even the hardest of souls. "Lunch will be done soon. Are you hungry?" Dahlia ignored the quiet protest of her stomach as she declined. Already retreating to her room, she called, "Maybe later." When she closed the door, she got straight to work. She grabbed her camera and binoculars from her desk drawer, placing them on the windowsill. As she crouched before the window, testing the coverage of her position, her phone rang. Upon her answering, she was greeted with 3 faces she'd rather not see at the moment. "Good, you're alive," Laura started. "We didn't know what happened to you after you left. Joseph said the mystery figure got you, but we didn't find that funny." "Hey," Joseph had the nerve to look offended. "I was only kidding." Dahlia fixed them with an impassive expression, placing her phone down to gather her braids into a low ponytail. "Laugh now. But you won't be laughing when I show you the mystery figure. You'll have no choice but to believe me." Joseph and Laura grew quiet, giving Jamie, who was usually quiet, the chance to speak up. "We're just worried about you, doll." Laura and Joseph agreed with a simultaneous hum. "Plus, if something happened to you, who could I bug when I'm bored? Or who will fold my socks while I'm at baseball practice?" Dahlia nearly laughed at Joseph's serious questions, knowing of an answer for each of them, but choosing to let him think he had a point. "Are you coming to school tomorrow?" Jamie asked, her attention solely focused on her black cat that somehow sprang onto her chest in a matter of seconds. "Can't." Dahlia's hands touched the uncomfortable metal bonded to her teeth as if second nature. "I have an appointment." All 3 of them grimaced. "I don't envy you, doll. Thank God I get mine off next week." Laura smiled for extra measure, showing off her 4 years' worth of progress. "Lucky you," Dahlia mumbled, Not long after, Jamie had to hang up, claiming she had homework to do. Lara soon followed when her mom started to yell at her in a language Dahlia only partially understood. Now, only Joseph remained. "You don't have anything else to do?" Joseph winced as if hurt before shaking his head. "Nope, you're stuck with me." Not letting her speak the sarcastic remark she always kept bottled up just for him, he blew out a small breath. "You can tell me if you're lying, you know. I won't tell a soul. Honest." He lifted a hand in pledge. Dahlia glared at his face on her screen. "I'm not—" Okay. He calmed her. "So, let's say you finally get us to see this thing. What then?" She froze, as if the thought hadn't crossed her mind, but it had. Only she'd been pushing it aside. What would she do? Tell her parents? Tell the authorities? She couldn't do that. At least not the latter. A small part of her taunted that she was slowly going insane and no one would believe her, but she silenced that voice. "I'm not crazy." "I never said you were?" Joseph's eyebrows creased at her accidental blurt. His lips then pulled into a teasing smile. "At least not out loud." "Shut up," she smiled. Joseph stayed on the phone with her for a few hours, not bringing up her discovery for the duration of their call. But the thought still plagued Dahlia's mind, and the sun was going down. She had to focus. She'd get those pictures no matter what. She tried to hang up, but his voice stopped her. "What are you having for dinner?" "I don't know. Why?" He innocently shrugged. "Can't your best friend stop by for dinner?" "No, he can't," she deadpanned. "Your parents wouldn't agree." "See you at dinner." She tried to form a remark, but he was gone. Good. Now she could finish her plan before dinner. "That was delicious, Mrs. Monica," Joseph commented from his slumped position at their dining table. Dahlia's mom pinched his cheek endearingly as she gathered his plate. Dahlia's dad and brother moved to the couch, flicking through the channels to find whatever sport best piqued their interest. Dahlia, however, made a beeline for the stairs. "Dahlia," her mother called, stopping her rather hasty retreat. "Can you make sure Joseph gets in safely?" With a suppressed groan, she forced a smile at her mother, letting it drop at Joseph's not-so-innocent grin. Although she could have watched him go home from her porch, she decided to walk beside him, and he made no move to protest. They were in front of his house in no time. "They're worried about you," Joseph quietly commented, keeping his eyes fixed on his front door. His hands found his pockets. She knew by "they" he meant himself, but to save him the embarrassment, she simply nodded. "They'll be all right. I'll be all right." Even to her own ears, it wasn't convincing. "You better," came his scolding remark. He then placed her in an easy-to-escape headlock. Replacing a childhood best friend isn't as easy as it seems. She elbowed him in the stomach, smiling as he grunted. "Yeah, well, you—" She trailed off as a white flash met her peripheral vision. She slowly straightened, fixing her eyes on the deteriorating building before her. Sitting on the very end of the street lay the decaying remains of a once beautiful home. From chipped white paint to a few slabs of material serving as a caved-in roof, was the ghost of the home once belonging to the late Gardner couple. Over 50 years had passed since the couple mysteriously disappeared in an accident too gruesome to be true. But their tale lived on in the form of a spooky story, the ending being that their restless souls still occupied the home they loved. But that didn't align with what Dahlia was taught. Her parents believed that the souls of man either resided with God Almighty or went to the place Dahlia and her brother, Matthew, used to call the eternal boiler. But with what she saw, she was beginning to second-guess her beliefs, if only to find some sort of clarity. She fixed her eyes on the singular window that faced towards them, the one she'd looked into nearly every day at the same exact time. She was only slightly disappointed to see the window dark and unoccupied, another voice reminding her of what she already knew. It wouldn't show just yet. It was too soon. That thought had her barreling back to her house, faintly acknowledging Joseph's distant demand to call him after her appointment the next day, and heading straight to her room. Dahlia waited. Waited until the lights of her neighbors' houses blinked off one by one. Waited until the distant shut of her brother's door sounded. Waited until her parents gently knocked on her door to wish her a good night before retreating to their room. Waited until the street grew exceedingly quiet, and not even a peep could be heard. Then she rose from her bed, taking position at her window, and watched. She kept keen eyes on the digital clock she had pasted to the side of her window. For this moment alone, watching the minutes tick by, slowly and silently. By the time 3:29 hit, she straightened with anticipation, eyeballs nearly touching the binoculars glued to the house at the end of the street. 3, 2, 1. There! The dim glow of a singular light drew her focused gaze even closer to the abandoned house. The sight was uncanny, unnatural even, considering its rundown condition. But Dahlia knew there was more. That's what kept her eyes on that window, no matter what. Not even for a blink. Then, as if summoned, the silhouette appeared, lithe and spindly in form. It glided by the window once and then twice, before centering itself in perfect view. Dahlia didn't even think as she exchanged binoculars for her camera, clicking down on the button. It was barely in focus before, click. Dahlia ducked as the bright flash of the camera gave her position away. She hissed in fear, remaining down for the duration of 2 seconds before peeking through the curtains that glided closed. The figure was gone, and shortly after, the light was extinguished, bathing the house in darkness once again. Dahlia groaned in annoyance, resting her forehead against the cold glass of her window. She had to hope and pray her singular picture caught what she intended. But it didn't. She had no choice but to bitterly clench her teeth and then retreat to her bed. As she did, she must have imagined catching a glimpse of the figure inside the darkened window, its form facing her. The next day, Dahlia rushed to get ready despite the incessant pounding in her head. Dark circles pulled beneath her russet skin, making her look like a zombie. She situated her golden brown braids into a style, using her favorite headband to keep the long ropes from pestering her. She met her mother in the car, where she tried her best to ignore the concern embedded in her mother's expression. Using the same script that kept her from sharing the truth for months now, Dahlia muttered an "I'm fine," fixing her exhausted stare on the passing scenery. She must have dozed off, because the next moment they were in front of the dentist's office. As usual, her mother waited outside until she was done, so Dahlia exited the car, nearly bumping into a giant pole she didn't notice. "Careful," came her mother's too-late warning. Dahlia glared at the stupid pole littered with papers that often consisted of ads, missing pets, or local garage sales. But one paper caused her steps to falter and retreat to that same stupid pole. Even though missing persons flyers were unnaturally common and occasionally looked over, Dahlia couldn't help but notice the peculiarity of this one. The boy, or teenager to be more exact, had been missing for over a few months now. He was 17 years old, 1 year older than her and Joseph, and was last seen at his home. Before the sudden house fire, a few numbers were listed at the very bottom of the flyer, demanding that one should contact them, but not approach if they happened to see the 6'1" black-haired, black-eyed teenager. With languid movements, Dahlia eventually peeled her eyes from the flyer. The next day came, and Dahlia was somehow even more exhausted than the previous days. "I'm going to investigate. Are you in or out?" Dahlia's sporadic question left her friends gaping at her, including Joseph. She expected as much, but for some odd reason, she was growing desperate. Her attempts at getting photos of the figure were rendered useless at her distance. But if she stood on the sidewalk, the figure might not show. Her only choice was to go in and see for herself. Joseph was the first to get over his shock. "Are you nuts?" Laura seconded his question with a nod. "Dahlia, you're going way too far." "Yeah, what if you're caught?" Jamie chewed her nails, clutching the cross necklace fastened around her neck. She cast wary eyes on Dahlia's impassive face. "Doll, you can't!" "What choice do I have, guys?" She threw up her hands in exhaustion. Thankfully, school had ended, and she asked to meet them near the outside bleachers. I'm tired of feeling like I'm crazy or something. I know what I saw. Laura gripped her shoulder with a sigh. Dahlia, you haven't had a good night's sleep in months. Everything you've been saying is crazy. Dahlia lowered her gaze to the grassy ground beneath them, releasing a breath. Fine, don't believe me, but aren't you going to join me? We can finally solve this mystery once and for all. What mystery, Dahlia? Laura retorted. The mystery of the— Forget it. Joseph, Jamie, are you guys in or what? She scanned their faces, watching Jamie shake her head with wide eyes, her hands still wrapped around her cross necklace. The sight frustrated her, leaving her to say, What are you so afraid of, Jamie? You're always quoting 1 Timothy 1:7, but at the drop of a dime, you're as shaky as a lonesome leaf being blown by a breeze. I mean, come on. The worst it can be is some creepy old man preying on children, but I doubt it. Her friends were overly silent, their expressions grim. As a last resort, she looked to Joseph. Joe, are you bailing on me too? He wouldn't meet her eyes, instead running a hand over his fresh cornrows. He then used the same hand to massage the back of his neck. Still not meeting her eyes, he said, Sorry, doll, I'm out. We're all worried about you, and— Well, stop worrying about me. If you don't believe me, why are we even friends? A drop of guilt tried to seep into her bones at the sight of her friend's hurt expressions, but her own hurt pushed her to hold in any apology formerly considered. I'm out of here. And she didn't look back. Dahlia picked over her barely touched food, resting her head on her hand. She released a lengthy sigh before she could stop herself. Is everything all right, Dahlia? She glanced up to see her parents staring at her, and surprisingly, her brother too. They all looked concerned. She was starting to hate that expression. Yeah, she sighed again, lifting her fork and eating a small bite of food despite her protesting stomach. I just got into an argument with Joseph, Laura, and Jamie. Oh? What about? Her mother asked, and her dad nodded in interest. She hesitated, considering telling them the truth. The whole truth. But no one would believe her, not even her parents. Knowing this, she said, It's dumb, don't worry about it. We've been meaning to talk to you about something, her dad said after a moment of silence. He exchanged a look with her mother, stilling her with his copper eyes that looked so similar to her own. Have you been having trouble sleeping? Out of habit, Dahlia reached for the area beneath her eyes. She knew gave away her exhaustion. She lowered her hand just as quickly, casting her eyes on her plate. I just have a lot on my mind. I'll be fine. She stood, planning to excuse herself. But her dad stopped her with a gentle hand on hers. You can talk to us, Dahlia, and Pastor Walter. At the mention of their pastor, Dahlia grew still. Dahlia was a member of Pastor Walter's church before she could walk, and during her time there, she knew her father's words were more than true. But Pastor Walter wouldn't understand. She even began to question if God himself would understand. Surely he saw what she tried to hide, right? She removed her hand from her dad's, giving him a smile meant to reassure, but knew it would appear forced. I'll keep that in mind. Good night. Without another word, she went upstairs and took a small nap before issuing her plan. She had 10 minutes before the figure showed. 10 minutes to get into the creepy old house and snap a picture of anything that seemed out of place. Anything that indicated there was some source of life inside the abandoned vessel. She shouldered her bag and made for the house. Having successfully made it downstairs without as much as a peep, she was able to stealthily stalk down the street, straight towards her target. She concealed a yelp as she passed Joseph's house, and a figure rushed at her with uncanny speed. It gripped her arms on both sides, shaking her until she felt dizzy. What do you think you're doing? Came Joseph's harsh whisper. Dahlia opened her eyes and stared into the gray ones glaring back at her. She tried to break out of his hold, but he held her tighter, shaking her again for extra measure. Let go of me, she whispered, through gritted teeth, mustering a glare of her own. Not until you listen to reason. You can't go into that house, Dahlia. And why not? She wanted to stomp her foot. Because you're being ridiculous. There is no figure in that broken down house. and you're not going to investigate anything. She started to peel his fingers from her arms, grunting at his resilience. I'm not being ridiculous, Joseph. You'll see. She broke out of his hold, heading for the house that was now only 20 steps away. Joseph grabbed her again, almost making her yell out of frustration. Listen to me, Dahlia. You're my best friend, and I care about you. But if you go into that house, I won't speak to you again. Dahlia's struggle ceased at Joseph's harsh words, and when she looked at him, he appeared every bit serious. She froze. You don't mean that, she breathed. I do. He stood even taller, an inch over her own tall form. She stared into her best friend's eyes, seeing the desperate plea he gave. But she couldn't stop now, not even for him. No one believed her. She'd just have to show them. She released a breath, and Joseph's grip lightened. But when he released her, she took one bold step towards the house. Then I guess this is goodbye, old friend. She took another step and then another. Only 17 steps remained between her and her unanswered questions. A mystery finally being solved. A sign that she wasn't crazy. 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. She turned to see if Joseph would watch her enter the house, but he was gone, leaving her all alone with the decision she made. She gave the faintest of nods and completed the steps left. The rusted gate creaked open, resembling the cackle of a witch. She hit a shutter and closed it behind her. From this close, the house looked even more ghastly. The once vivid grass, now an overgrown heap of cadaverous remains. The once welcoming pavement leading to the steps of a happy home now lay cracked and tousled, damaged beyond repair. What was left of the stairs could barely be called such, but Dahlia scaled them regardless. The porch was covered in refuse that almost made her gag, but she held it in, reaching for the screen door. She had to hurriedly catch the screen when she realized it was rusted off at the hinges. She laid it aside, twisting the grimy doorknob and pushing open the main door. When it complied with ease, Dahlia readied herself for what she'd see. Clicking on her flashlight, she was met with a dust-covered living room littered with all kinds of miscellaneous items. From shards of glass to old and worn fabrics of clothing, Dahlia took in everything. Water leaked from various places in the ceiling, and the house held the musty smell of mildew and urine, urging her to plug her nose from its pungency, but she refused. The smell wouldn't deter her. Something jumped from the corner of the house, the shriek of rats making her skin jolt. They skittered into where Dahlia assumed the kitchen was, so she steered clear of the cat-sized rodents. She wandered further into the house, soon stumbling across a crooked staircase. With each step she took, the deteriorating wood groaned in agony, begging her to make her ascension quick. She acquiesced, making it to the top floor. A long, eerie hallway greeted her with doors left ajar, beckoning in what little light the outside world had to offer. All but one, the door at the very end of the hall. Dread filled Dahlia's being, but she knew she had come too far to back away now. With dawdling movements, she reached the door, and with an audible exhale, she opened the door. She shrank into herself, expecting the worst, but was only met with a surprisingly neat and almost empty space. Almost empty. The sight of rumpled bedding on top of cardboard and a few boxes of things she couldn't quite see had her movements halting completely. She intended to slowly back away, having seen enough, but a presence at her back made her tense. The presence was close, very close. Close enough that its breath fanned the top of Dahlia's head. But apparitions couldn't breathe, right? She turned, achingly slow, and saw a hooded figure bathed in darkness. The figure reached toward her, revealing a ghastly, pale, human-like hand. Burn marks snaked up the hand, disappearing behind what Dahlia now recognized as a black hoodie. She screamed, or tried to scream, but the figure covered her mouth, muffling her sound with the same hand that reached towards her. Its grip was firm, but not painful, but she was too panicked to realize. She thrashed and wriggled when its other hand grabbed hold of her arm. the impact of a falling bag sounding off in the silence of the house. Her heart pounded against her chest, demanding she break free by any means, and she did. She sank her teeth into the surprisingly soft flesh of her captive, hearing a deep grunt before the hand fell from her mouth. Not waiting for its next move, she barreled past the figure, flying down the stairs and ripping open the door she could have sworn she left ajar. Her feet pounded against the pavement in a rhythm that matched her breaths. When she made it to her house, she fell to the ground in relief, her whole body trembling. She eventually found her strength. Her breaths regulated and climbed the stairs. Not paying attention to anything but making it to her room in one shaky piece, she collided face first with a solid form, nearly sending her to her backside. "Dahlia," came Matthew's confused voice. Her panic settled into mutual confusion at seeing her brother fully clothed, a bag resting in his hand. At her directed gaze, the bag disappeared behind his back. Matthew, where are you going?" His eyes darted to everything but her face, his 15-year-old voice surprisingly deep. "Nowhere. Where were you?" Her lips pursed at his suspicion-laced tone. He let his eyes scan her dark attire, his eyes lingering on an area near her arm. Out of habit, she reached for it, finding a hole in her jacket. She must have snagged it in her desperate escape. "I asked you first." She fixed him with a stern glare, and he returned it with equal fervor. She knew the only reason why she looked away first was because Matthew's eyes were the exact image of their mother's, and when she stared into your eyes, it was close to impossible to tell a lie. When she glanced back at her brother, they had a silent conversation. With a nod, they went their separate ways, Dahlia to her room and Matthew to his. Their conversation only consisted of 9 shared words and a mutual agreement. "I won't tell Mom and Dad if you won't." After changing into her nightclothes, Dahlia slid into bed, her mind immediately ushering her into thinking of what had just occurred. There was definitely something in that house, not an apparition, but a person. And from the way he tried to silence her, she knew not many, if any, had known he was there. Her skin crawled at the way the man's hand gripped her mouth, the way he held her arm. She wanted to blame it on her adrenaline-induced state, but she could have sworn she saw black eyes staring back at her. It wasn't just the color, she realized. That stunned her, but the look behind them. They looked almost as terrified as hers. Dahlia shuddered, burying herself deeper into her cover. Her tremors didn't cease, so she did what she hadn't done in a long time. She prayed, and prayed and prayed, unable to deny the peace that filled her so strongly. She was ushered into a rest that didn't bring nightmares about the mystery man living in that abandoned house. The next day, Dahlia was woken up by loud banging on her door. She groaned and rolled to her other side. What time was it? "Dahlia, Mom said to get up. You're going to make us late, again." Matthew rattled her doorknob in the infuriating way he knew she couldn't ignore. She sat up. "Okay, I'm up. Get your dirty hands off my door," she yelled, hearing him kick her door before leaving her. There was only one reason why Matthew would be bothering her on the weekend. Church. Dahlia groaned again. Last week, she was able to stay home after letting her parents see her sleep-deprived state, but this time wouldn't be so easy. She sucked up whatever sulking she previously considered and got ready. The building was quickly filling in what Dahlia knew would be a full house today, as it usually was. Her family scaled the pews, settling in the middle row. Without thinking, she scanned her surroundings, finding Laura, Jamie, and Joseph sitting together. As if searching for her too, they caught her eye. Jamie and Laura offered gentle smiles, but Joseph looked away from her with a scoff, crossing his arms over his chest and directing his eyes elsewhere. Before he did, he gave her a look that had her chest aching. Was it worth it? He seemed to ask. And at the moment, Dahlia couldn't decide if it was or not. Instead, she focused on Pastor Walter as he greeted those around him. He smiled, waved, hugged, and spoke with those around him with a love she knew wasn't rehearsed. It was because of him that she knew the one he served was the epitome of such love and compassion. and showed it endlessly to all of his creation. Her heart warmed with the thought. Service began with hymns, including her favorite, "He is Lord," and progressed with prayer and announcements of upcoming events of volunteering. Shortly after, Pastor Walter stood up to speak. "Let us pray." All heads bowed as Pastor Walter spoke from his heart, thanking the Lord for the blessing of breath, life, and new mercies. He prayed for guidance and for the posture of hearts, for the ability for the word to be received joyfully. He asked for the protection of those who couldn't make it and for those who didn't know of his goodness. The prayer ended, and Dahlia raised her head, a familiar eagerness filling her to hear the word. Pastor Walter read to them a passage from Deuteronomy 15, speaking on generosity to the less fortunate, and Dahlia's ears perked in interest. He spoke on the importance of outreach to those who cry out for help, claiming that nowadays many disregard the poor and treat them wickedly. But God sees all. A certain part towards the end stuck out to her. "For the poor will never cease from the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor and your needy, in your land." She wasn't initially sure why her heart burned with such fervency, but she found her hand massaging the spot right over her chest. Why did her mind keep going back to the incident the day before? It was now as clear as day that the figure inhabiting the abandoned house was merely a person just as she was. But the question of why had her mind reeling for a different reason she hadn't considered before. It would take a certain level of desperation for a man to make such an unlivable place livable, and her heart burned even more. She thought back to the grip of the man's hands, realizing he had been trembling nearly as badly as she was, in his dark eyes. He wasn't angry, he was scared. The fear he'd shown was more childlike than manlike, which had her thinking even harder to try and piece things together. The dark eyes, the pale, lithe figure, the burned scars that marred his skin. Dahlia released a gasp before she could stop herself. Thankfully, no one seemed to hear. No one but Matthew, who gave her an incredulous look before shaking his head and focusing on Pastor Walter again. Service ended, and Dahlia was desperate to get home. She nearly dragged her parents by the hands before they could engage in conversations that could last hours at least. When they reached the exit, she let out a sigh of relief. "Dahlia." She turned to see Laura and Jamie standing by the door, their expressions drawn and hesitant. She approached them with equal hesitance. "We're sorry," they simultaneously said. Dahlia reached for their hands. "No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have tried to force you guys into believing me." She shook her head, her braids following the action. "You guys were right. I did sound crazy. I was too distracted to see how much you guys truly cared." Before she could blink, she was pulled into a group hug. She held her friends, blinking back tears she didn't expect to come forth. When they departed, she looked beside them as if expecting Joseph to randomly appear. "Tell Joseph I'm sorry," she twisted her fingers. "I'm the worst best friend ever." Laura clasped Dahlia's hand, a mischievous smile tugging at her lips. "No need. Something tells me he'll be coming around soon." She cast a glance towards something Dahlia couldn't see, but Laura didn't give her a chance to ask. "It seems you were in a rush earlier. I hope it wasn't to escape us." Dahlia blew out a nervous laugh at her friend's raised brow and shook her head. No. There's just something really important I have to do." They departed soon after, making plans to hang out soon. Dahlia rejoined her parents' side and tried her hardest to contain herself until she could make it to her room. Tonight would be the last time, Dahlia found herself promising. No more late nights spent obsessing over the mysterious figure, driving herself into sleep deprivation. No more secrets, and most importantly, no more fear. "For you are with me," she prayed. God would make himself known to those who called on him, and Dahlia was desperately calling his name. She knew he was real, and now she needed him to do something for her. If nothing else, this. She slung her bag over her shoulder, making sure she had everything. Instead of stealthily making her way out of the house immediately, she waited for the flicker of light to come on just one last time. Just once. She almost lost hope as 3:30 came around, but the dim flicker of what she assumed to be a candle lit up the room, bathing it in warm orange. Then she moved. She didn't falter until she reached the gate. With a deep breath and a squeeze on her bag strap, she walked through the lawn, climbed the deteriorating steps, and opened the door. She didn't bother looking back as she closed it behind her, masking the place in temporary darkness. Her flashlight flickered on, guiding the way she'd traveled just the other day. She scaled the staircase, surprised to hear its lack of protest this time around. When she reached the top, her muscles clenched, tension flooding over her at what she might see this time around. She urged it away with a deep breath and a silent prayer. All would be well. The door at the very end of the hallway was wide open, the flickering light of the candle making shadows against the wall. Even then, she felt no fear. She stopped in the doorway, catching sight of the figure, the boy she'd encountered just the other day. He didn't seem to notice her presence at his back, with his attention solely directed at something outside the window, most likely her window, from where she watched him for months on end. "Looking for me?" she couldn't help but ask. The boy tensed as he whirled around, fixing panicked dark eyes on her. His mouth dropped open in a silent gape. They observed each other in heavy silence, and Dahlia's eyebrows slowly pulled together at the sight of him without his hoodie concealing his identity. The burn marks weren't only on his hands, but all over him. From where a black t-shirt cut the rest of his torso off from her vision, she knew that it was covered in scars as well. Although his face was marked, she could still make out his features, and he didn't look much older than she. Dahlia removed her bag from her shoulders and placed it at her feet, overly aware of his assessing eyes. She then raised her hands, allowing him to see she wasn't armed. "I come in peace," she said with a soft smile. "Emilio Dupont." Emilio's thick eyebrows raised at the name he hadn't expected her to utter, and by his reaction, she knew she was right. Emilio was the missing teenager from the flyer. But why? Instead of asking, she gradually lowered her hands into her book bag, taking out a lunchbox. She stretched her hand to give it to him, but he shrank back. She opened the container, taking one of the pieces of chicken her mother prepared for dinner, and took a bite, flashing him an encouraging smile. "See? It's safe." He only hesitated a few moments longer before taking the box from her hands and retreating to his makeshift bed. He ate quickly, scarfing down the food as if she'd change her mind and take it from him. Her heart ached at the idea. As he finished every last bit of the meal, Dahlia tossed him a sealed bag of fresh fruit, rolling him a cold bottle of water. He retrieved both, his eyes seemingly shining with gratitude. She waited until he was done to speak. "I'm sorry I bit you. I thought you were a ghost or a creepy old man." Emilio flashed her a questioning glance at the last part she muttered, a hint of amusement lifting his expression. The sight made her feel more at ease, and she entered the room. With only a second of apprehension, she gestured to a spot near him, and he nodded. She sat with a sigh, observing the room in which he slept for all these months. It happened to be the one in the best shape. "Creepy, huh?" At the sound of Emilio's deep voice, she flinched, finding him staring at her. He wiped water from his lips with the back of his hand and secured the cap of the near-empty bottle. When she realized he was referring to the house, she faltered. She scanned the room from a new perspective, finding no hints of repulsion. She sucked in a breath. "If you asked me yesterday, I would have said yes, but now..." "Now?" Emilio ran a hand through the thick, dark hair Dahlia had just now seemed to notice. Her voice lowered. "It gave you shelter. There's nothing creepy about that to me." He seemed conflicted with her answer, his own voice lowering. "But I'm sure you're wondering how I ended up here, like this." On the way, he peered at his own skin as if it were an oddity, a piece of refuse. Dahlia's chest was covered with a harsh sharpness. It only hurt more at his next words. "I'm a freak." "No, you're not," Dahlia yelled, whirling on him. With that movement, the slowly dying candlelight she hadn't noticed before went out, engulfing them in complete darkness. She scrambled for her flashlight she had stuffed in her bag and clicked it on. She aimed it at Emilio, but he was gone. A small movement at her side had her flashing it in that direction, the light catching Emilio's standing form. It was so dark outside, not even the moonlight gave him away. Dahlia stood too, making sure to keep a respectful distance. She squared her shoulders. "You are not a freak." "Easy for you to say," he whispered. "You don't look like me. Your skin isn't ruined." "Is that why you ran away?" She couldn't help the question that left her lips. He turned to her, a solemn look on his face. His eyes were hard, tortured. He ran both hands through his hair, releasing a deeply held breath. "Ghosts don't have to run." When Dahlia peered up at him in confusion, he turned away from her, resting his hand on the murky glass. "I wasn't supposed to escape that fire." She didn't pry, but it didn't seem like she needed to. He was an overflowing well of information, leaving her to simply listen to whatever this broken stranger would give her. "I was a troubled child, lost and broken from many things I never asked to endure. One day my uncle and aunt had gotten tired of my antics. They'd said they were taking a road trip, said they'd be back at the end of the week. But they came back much earlier. I guess I wasn't supposed to see them because they were sneaking around back with 2 cans of gasoline. They began dousing the house with it, but by the time I realized what they were doing in the dark, the house was slowly burning to the ground. I escaped, but then I heard a cry. His hand balled into a fist and landed on his chest. They left my cousin, their son, to burn and die with me. I tried my best to get him out, but I was too weak. I called for help, but no one answered. Until..." He shook his head as if he was about to say something utterly ridiculous. Dahlia didn't think before reaching out to touch him, her hand landing on his bare arm. The overly rough texture made her gasp, and Emilio appeared guilty and hurt. He went to move his arm away from her, but she held on, making sure he saw her eyes when she said, "Finish your story. I'm listening." He gave a faint nod and continued, "I saw a man, but he didn't look like a normal man though. He was glowing, bright, too bright for me to handle. One moment he was standing above me, and the next we were outside. By the time I came to my senses, my cousin was..." He swallowed hard, fighting off a pain unseen. "I was too late. I couldn't save him." "But you tried," Dahlia reasoned, her own throat tight with emotion. Her hand squeezed his arm tighter, a subconscious gesture. "You cared enough to go back and save him." "But I failed," he said, through clenched teeth. "And now I have to live with these scars and the memory of my failure. My efforts were pointless." "Not pointless," she emphasized sternly. "You loved him enough to risk your life, Emilio. That's not pointless." When he didn't answer, she squeezed him again, gaining a glance. "Do you believe that was an angel you saw?" "I don't know." He crossed his arms over his chest, successfully removing her hand from him. "Why would God send help for me?" "Because he loves you," she answered, without a second thought. "You cried for help, and the Lord answered you. He would never leave you alone. Never." She then said words they both needed to hear. "God isn't so far away that he can't hear the cries of his people. He's actually a lot closer than we think." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because there are people out there who don't believe they're worthy to be loved. But God says otherwise. Even on our worst days, he deems us worthy." Her words sank deep into her chest, resonating in a chasm she thought she'd left, unable to be occupied. She hoped Emilio could receive the word she'd needed to receive for a while now. He looked at her, a small spark of hope lighting the darkness in his eyes. To her surprise, he smiled at her, the warmth behind it bringing a smile to her face. "What the heck?" At the sound of another voice, both of their heads swiveled to the door, finding Matthew standing there with a look of shock on his face. Dahlia's expression matched his, her mouth falling open. "Matthew? What are you doing here?" "Me?" He pointed an accusatory finger at her. "What are you doing here?" Their glaring contest was cut short when Emilio cleared his throat. "So you two know each other?" The familiarity of his tone told her this wasn't Matthew's first time coming here. And from the bag in Matthew's hand, Dahlia's suspicions were confirmed. "So this is where you've been sneaking off so late at night?" She didn't feel as annoyed as she had a moment before, realizing her brother had the same idea as her. "How long have you been doing this for?" 5 months, he shrugged, as if mentioning the weather. "I was coming home from school one day when I saw someone in the backyard of this house. I wanted to investigate, so I did. And then he found me." After shrieking like a little girl, Emilio added with a chuckle. Matthew glared at him. "I thought you said you weren't going to say anything about that." Emilio simply gave an apologetic shrug. "From there on out, I've been sneaking him food and water, but I had a little help." "From who?" she asked. "Mom and Dad." "What?" She slapped a hand over her own mouth when her voice echoed throughout the house. She lowered her volume. "They knew?" "I couldn't keep it from them forever. Mom was starting to grow worried about the portions I was taking from dinner. And Dad started to worry I was growing bored of watching sports with him because I started going to bed early." He made it seem so simple, but Dahlia's head was spinning. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I figured you had other things on your mind." He cast a wary glance over her face, and she knew he was referring to the dark circles around her eyes. "So, this is your sister?" Emilio asked after a moment of tense silence. Dahlia answered for him. "Yes, his older sister." "By 1 year," Matthew added, as if it made a difference. "This is Dahlia." Realizing she hadn't introduced herself, she gave him an apologetic smile. "Nice to meet you," Emilio repeated her, and returned her smile. "Are you hungry, or did my sister already feed you?" With one sideways glance at the empty lunchbox near Emilio's sleeping area, Matthew rolled his eyes. "I'll take that as a yes." They fell into casual conversation for the next hour, but when Emilio yawned, Dahlia and Matthew exchanged a knowing look. Matthew left Emilio with the food he had packed for him, mentioning how he might be hungry in the morning. Emilio didn't protest, only giving a tired smile. As Matthew left the room, Dahlia found herself falling back. She made sure she had Emilio's attention. "I believe God is proud of you," his head shot up. "Even if you didn't succeed in saving your cousin's life, you at least tried. I think that counts for something. Good night, Emilio." She left before he could speak, but judging by his clouded expression, she knew a response wouldn't have come for quite a while. She trailed Matthew out of the house, making sure to firmly close the door on their way out. As Dahlia lay in bed, she found herself praying deeply for Emilio, for him to find peace, and more importantly, God. With a yawned amen, she drifted into a deep sleep, the same peace she prayed for her new friend, finding her in her own rest. The sun gradually ascended into the sky, ushering in the soft song of birds and the gentle hues of a peaceful sunrise. Dahlia yawned, preparing to pray before getting ready for school, but someone burst into her room, her brother's frantic expression setting her on alert. "Emilio's gone." She threw her blanket off, standing as her heart threatened to lurch out of her chest. "Did you see anything out of place?" Matthew ran a hand over his short-cut hair. "Well, no, but I saw him walking down the street. I tried to stop him, but he told me not to. He said he had to face his fears, whatever that meant." Dahlia's hand cupped her mouth as a gasp escaped it. At her brother's confused stare, she asked, "Did he say anything else?" Matthew scratched his neck. "He did, actually. He said thank you for helping him to see the truth." Despite her sadness at his sudden departure, Dahlia's lips pulled into a soft smile. Her prayers worked. "So that's it?" Matthew dejectedly asked, not caring to hide his disappointment at his friend's absence. She squeezed her brother's hand, offering a reassuring smile. "For now, but we can always pray to see him again." Matthew seemed to hold on to that reassurance, finding a smile of his own. "Yeah, we can, can't we?" And they did just that. And when their parents woke, they did it all over again, holding on to faith that one day they would be reunited with the misunderstood boy in the abandoned house. Dahlia sat outside, catching wisps of sunlight in the late afternoon. Her eyes closed as a peace she couldn't comprehend fell over her. "Glad to see you're getting some rest." Dahlia didn't have to open her eyes to know who stood before her, and her lips quirked into a knowing smile. It's been much easier with the absence of a certain annoying presence. Expecting to at least hear a scoff, she was surprised to find silence awaiting her. Joseph released a breath, taking the seat beside her on her porch. He leaned back, driving fingers into the curly afro he now wore. He lowered his khaki-toned hand, casting guarded gray eyes on her. "I only came by to get my hair braided by Mrs. Monica. Figured it would be rude to walk by without saying hello," he grumbled. Dahlia simply shrugged at his evident lie, feigning indifference. "She's waiting inside for you. Better not keep her long." She opened her eyes and was met with a glare. He didn't give her the chance to ask what had him so upset. "Do you seriously not care, Dahlia?" Hurt flashed in his eyes before he looked away from her. "You didn't think twice before you left me. I thought we were friends." Conviction jabbed her chest with the evident betrayal in his voice. "Of course we are, Joe. I'm sorry for pushing you away. I didn't realize how selfish I was being." "Yeah, you were?" His tone softened, his anger dissipating. "Did you at least find what you were looking for?" Dahlia's gaze traveled to the house at the end of the street, seeing it in a whole new light. A warm smile lifted her lips. "Not even close." "It was better than I could have ever imagined," she added the last part in her mind. Joseph flicked her nose with a snort. "Told you so. Now look at you." He began teasing her, and she openly welcomed it. "Friends?" She glanced at him hopefully, holding her hand out. He looked at her hand as if she had blown snot into it before smiling warmly, taking her hand in his. "Best friends." As they went into her house, Dahlia knew everything had worked out according to God's plan, even if she didn't know it at first. She smiled up at the sky, envisioning God smiling right back at her.